What is up, guys? This is Wild Rocker, and today my character discussion will be Kano. I know that I mentioned in the last video that I would have something with, cybernetics, possibly such as Sector, Cyrex, Smoke, or Cyber Sub-Zero, or even Jax even with the cybernetic guards. But I went instead, and I went to think outside the box, and I went to go do Kano. Now, a lot of people are like, well, how can you compare Kano to a cyborg? Well, he kind of is, basically. I mean, he does have some cybernetics, such as his eye, the chest plate, if you want to call it that, which brings me on subject. I don't know if no one's noticed this or not, but doesn't it kind of look similar to Who's How or Suhao, if I pronounced that correctly, and back in Mortal Kombat Armageddon days? Now, I know a lot of people did not like him, but some did, okay? But the thing is that as for the actual, chest beam looking, design, it looks like they scrapped that from Suhao. So did they give that to Kano? Who really knows? But what we do know is the different variations of Cutthroat, Cybernetic, and Commando. And as you can obviously see through this picture above, that the Cybernetic does not use his knives. Now, granted, you might get your generic and basic moves, such as the cannonball move, the upward cannonball move, and, the eye laser, but I'm pretty sure with that variation in particular, that style, that fighting style, that you won't actually get to use the knives, but instead you will be focusing more on cybernetics, obviously, such as, the laser eye and whatever he may have. Now, I know in the Cutthroat version, he tends to use his, I'm assuming they're Bowie knives or honey knives. I'm pretty sure there might be Bowie knives, and his variations of, combos and fighting style in general. Now, as most people have already seen, such as in his X-ray, where he actually stabs them from the lower abdomen and kind of brings it up all the way to their chest area. Oh my god, that is just unbelievably brutal. That is like a fatality within itself. It's absolutely ridiculous and totally over the top, and guess what? We like it. And as a fan of, other characters besides Kano, I really didn't like Kano, back in the day. I did like him with his hair, however, and sometimes, when he was bald, like in Mortal Kombat 1 and MK Trilogy, but, that's just designs. But anyways, as for, not being a fan of Kano, I can actually say that this game is making me, hyped and for actually playing as him, because, even the sounds, all the way down to even the sound bits of him actually punching a victim or an enemy or an opponent, and, actually hearing the metal from his head, from his eye area, bashing into, let's say, Raiden. It even sounds brutal, It's kind of like the same thing when a cyborg faced a cyborg in Mortal Kombat 9, and you can actually hear the metal going ding, ding, and echoing. It wasn't just like you punch somebody like Liu Kang or Kung Lao. You could actually hear the echoing of the metal. And that's what I heard with Kano when he was fighting Raiden in the forest stage. Which, by the way, I might get a little off topic here, but I noticed in the forest stage that, we've seen the shadows, we know the vines and stuff you can climb up on during battle, because of the interactive backgrounds. But I also noticed a female statue in the background. It was not close up, and it wasn't the one that was on the far left side of the arena. It was actually the one on the far right side of the arena. And I don't know about you guys, but it kind of looked like a female that was in a cape. Now, I don't know if it was some, reference to possibly Sindel, or, maybe a new character, or even Devora, as her costume shows her in a cape. It could be, her origins of where she was currently staying, maybe in the story mode, or possibly anything else. It could be somebody whole new. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And one more thing was there was actually some type of alligator or crocodile that was actually in the swamp water area in the background, and I saw it pop up in a couple gameplays, very, very rarely though, and it would actually swim around, and you could see its eyes looking around and its tail wagging. And a lot of people have asked me, is this a reference to reptile, being a reptilian, animal? And to be honest, I wouldn't overdo it, guys. It's probably just an alligator. I know a lot of us like to over-speculate things, such as that shadow picture, we thought it was Shinnok or Noob Saiba, and it turned out to be Quan Chi. But as for, any hints to the alligator being in that area, in that video, I honestly think it was just an alligator or crocodile, guys. I don't think it has any relation at all with reptile or anything like that. But as for Kano, yes, we obviously know he's in. That's duh. But NetherRealm Studios said that Ed Boon had details of the older, more cybernetic than ever, quote, Kano, and 3 fighting styles, which was his cutthroat variation, and he can pound on his glowing cybernetic heart to power up his attacks. So that makes me think, he can probably maybe charge up his health, maybe, or his actual strength, because I know with Kotal Khan that he actually has these they look like little totem poles or something like that, like little ritual statues or something that pop up out of the ground. And either they give him more health or they actually make him, more powerful as in strength. Kind of like with Farah and Tor as well, as if Farah was to stab her daggers or knives into Tor, he would become enraged and get a little bit more pissed off. Now, she wouldn't do that to deliberately, well, actually, she would kind of do that deliberately just to piss him off and hurt him because, he's a big dude. And if a little shit like Farah is going to piss him off, even though she's on his side, I really do feel sorry for the opponent because now he's, pissed off and he's bleeding and, he's like an animal that's been wounded. And that's something you don't want to fuck with. But as for Kano, in his cutthroat variation, he can pound on his cybernetic heart, which apparently that is another feature that he has now, such as a cybernetic heart, and power up his attacks. Boone says and primarily fights with a knife-based combos. So as you would think, he would use mostly his Bowie knives, and cannonballs, and just generic combos pretty much. The cybernetic Kano gives the fighter more laser eye attacks and arm him with grenades to give him much more range. So if you're probably thinking about zoning, which I wouldn't recommend it, but if you were thinking about zoning, then I would probably choose cybernetic because this time he actually has grenades. So instead of those blue laser, kind of they look like lightsabers, that he kind of had, back in Trilogy, which now, they're just Bowie knives that he throws. He also has grenades too. So he's kind of got a more military / cybernetic kind of move list overall, genre-wise. I mean, I know each 3 variation is different, but as for overall as a character, I think that he's become more military-like. And it's kind of ironic since his rivals are Sonya and Jax, and they're in the Special Forces, So it's really kind of, it makes me kind of, curious on why did they go with this style? Why did they go with that type of design with them? So I thought that was really cool. And the cybernetic, gives more laser eye attacks and arms him with grenades to give him much more range. So that's pretty neat. The commando variation, however, enhances Kano's grappling skills for more close-range attacks. So I'm assuming in this game that they're going to actually have, different variations, such as an offensive variation, a defensive variation, and probably a zoning variation as well. Whether that's confirmed, with all the characters' variations, I have no idea. But it could possibly be done, Some people think it's, for the 3 variations, it's offensive, defensive, and zoning. Most people think it's close up, far range, and, pretty much random, as for the 3rd one. Now, as for my opinions, I would probably go with the first one and say that, it was for offensive, defensive, and possibly zoning. Now, with the Commando version, he is more, of a grappler. Kind of, once again, kind of ironic to Jax. So it's let's say if Jax, now this hasn't been confirmed, let's say if Jax is in, will he also be a grappler like he usually is? Or will he have a whole new moveset as well, It seems like they're packing as much movesets per character in every single variation, which, I thought it would just be the same pretty much variation per character, just with maybe 2 or 3 couple moves, and that was the only difference. But as you see, the cutthroat variation, he, hits his cyber heart and it actually, gives him more strength. In a cybernetic version, he does more of an eye move, and cybernetics kind of tactics. And in the commando version, he's more of a close up, unlike cybernetic, how he's kind of like a far zoning type. And with the commando version, he's actually close up, brutal, like right in your face, and also a grappler. So you can definitely see the differences between all three variations, even though we're talking about the same exact character in all three. I noticed that in, when he was revealed a long time ago, and they were showing the each in particular variations, such as just the color, that someone said he kind of looks like a damn traffic light, and and as kind of sarcastic as that sounds, it actually kind of does. I mean, come on, you got the green, red, and yellow. I mean, come on, and it makes me think, does the colors in general have anything to do with the actual variation of that character, such as like Quan Chi. He has purple, he has green, and he has red. Okay, Kano has green, red, and yellow. Okay, Raiden, he has a variation where there's like hardly any electricity around him. There's another one where he's like totally, just filled with electricity, but not on his actual like cornrow hat. And then the third variation, he is completely, has like electric like everywhere, like all over his body, including his hat. So it makes me think, does any variation in particular, could it possibly be OP? Could it possibly be, patched as, being too powerful, or even too or less powerful, because it seems like with all these different variations, could it be possible that, one of them versus a certain other character's variation would be, unfair, such as, if Kano's cybernetic version faced, Sub-Zero's Grandmaster version, and a lot of people, are trying to think outside the box, as in, there's a lot of variations, as for, just one character versus one character. I mean, you figure 3-on-3, as for variation wise, it can be limitless. It really can. So not only is that exciting and, really fun to talk about, it also gives a lot of people of, practicing with that in particular character. I actually had a buddy of mine that, he says, what do you do when you usually get bored of the game? I said, well, we probably will get bored, with the game down the road. I said, but no time soon. I said, there is no way in hell that any of us are going to get bored after, like, even fucking probably 2 or 3 years of playing this game. I said, it might get a little bit boring. He says, well, what would you do? I said, well, I would play the story. I would try to practice with each character, at least master one variation, at least one, if possible. And if I like that character and I, wanted to know him even more or her even more, then I would try their other variations. And he's like, well, what happens if I just want to choose one and that's it? That's totally fine, but if you get bored, that's kind of your own fault, because you still have 2 options available. And not just only with that character, but you have many, many other characters with many, many other variations as well. So, nobody should be bored or even think about, being bored, because one, this game rocks your fucking socks. You guys gotta admit it. I admit it. This game's fucking amazing. And 2, the game hasn't even came out yet. It's not even coming out until next year. So not only that, but it's gonna be pretty fucking sweet. So I'm definitely excited. And like I said, I'm not usually a Kano fan, but because of what I've seen, such as gameplay and graphic-wise, and even variation-wise, I can say that I'm a Kano fan now. And, and trust me, I don't like those people that just fucking spam, the cannonball all the time, oh my god. But as for, like, even Quan Chi, like, I was never a fan of Quan Chi, even in MK9, I was never really a fan, even though I liked who he was and, his story and everything. But after seeing the fighting styles and, the different variations with Quan Chi and Mortal Kombat X, it just blew my mind, So they're really trying to step it up, And I don't really think that they're really slacking off or anything like that, which, like I said, I'm a critic as for NRS, but as for how much, like, jam-packed, quality that they're giving us in variations, per character, like, it's literally playing as the same character, but also, in a different way, sort of, a different variation. And I think that's really awesome that they're trying to give us, as much, like, styles and much combos and much, different, specialties for that character and uniqueness. So, but yeah, so for my last hint, I said something about cybernetics and I had Kano, so I think next time I might do an ice character. And I know a lot of people are still trying to guess, with the hints, what kind of character I'm going to do. So I think this hint for next video, I'm going to do a ice character. Now remember, guys, that could probably be Frost, that could be Sub-Zero, that could be Cyber Sub-Zero, you never know. So until next time, guys, this has been Wild Rocker. And if you liked the video, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you already haven't. I'll see you guys next time in the next video. Peace out.